Next to you.
Start
This
the
is
open
huge.
house.
You start us in prayer.
中间要水吗？
哦，start 祷告。
OK，
John, one's fine.
可以。彼此中文意思吗？宣布我们将今天下午的这个学习交给主你手中，主真的是不仅是学习要做老师，也是在各个方面，我们都需要生命不断的被调试，按照这个你圣经里面已经启示我们的这一切美好的这个方式，就求主你，让我们有个受教的心，也是保守我们。我们知道现在3点钟，大家是蛮疲累的，但是求主你赐下格外的精力，谢谢你，我们要祈求感谢，奉靠你神。
Amen.
So we're going to start with something that just.
Oh, wait. One family just got.
That's fine. So we're going to start with
Well,
something.
3 families together. Okay.
Well, then I'll wait.
狗狗好好玩，你看这狗狗会站起来啊！
对，他特别喜欢站起来，他要吃的，
这样子啊，
特别馋。我们家这只狗。
Krista，你可以到楼上去，
Yeah, they're upstairs.
让这位在。Yeah, this side.
你要带他吃东西，还是要？
不用了，就让他再用那个王爷的房间吧，行吧？
哦，那个 office， 王月，你帮我搜一下好吗？
要请他，或者在这里也行，你要哪边方面都可以。
哦，
应该要
有的来。
分出来是吧？
Friends, it's okay.
狗很贵啊。
嘿，进来。
Oh, Prince, we was Prince.
Their dog is very funny. One time he ran out, and when they say "奖励," reward, and the dog came rush back. 那个奖励就
Have a seat. Have a seat.
Sorry,
Make a seat. We're just now starting, and we're just starting with some fun stuff. So, over here. Helen hasn't heard this yet. Our Sunday school class this morning was on spiritual gifts. So our teacher asked us to tell what our spiritual gifts are, and which was unwise. And so after quite a bit of silence, the only answer he got was I said that I can forget things better than anybody else I know. So then he said, okay, what are your spouse's spiritual gifts? Because of course now I'm going to say, I have the gift of prophecy. I have the gift of administration.
What did you say about me?
I said a great deal about you, which you were not there to stop me from saying.
Okay.
So.
Now you can stop.
So this is just fun because I figured people would come in and sit down. I showed this to my own children when they were getting ready to drive, and I actually showed it to. Oh,
Okay, sorry.
Nice.
That chair is too heavy.
nice.
Someone else is at the door.
Safety.
Yeah, it's a safety mark. This is actually when I was an employee at BG. We couldn't have any meetings without starting with safety moment, so this was my favorite.
Oh, you work for British Gas?
I did for 5 years. So this is kind of a test, and you may have to come up here and look at it a little bit. So this truck obviously has been wrecked. Can you figure out what path the truck took to wind up here?
Yes.
让你们猜猜那个卡车是怎么样到那里的？
Oh, yeah.
This is it. I think I see this picture before. That's why.
Yeah, yes. If I show this to you, don't say anything.
Fly from the other side.
So he's coming from this way.
You ready?
He drove off the road to the other side, overcorrected, came through. See this concrete barrier that's knocked down? He took out that concrete barrier, came across here hanging a couple of his tires on this so that he didn't go down and smash into the concrete. Did a 360 and wound up there. Which, you see that, and you figure he was very lucky, right?
Yeah.
You have no idea how lucky he was because this is only part of the picture. This is the whole picture.
You're good.
Wow.
笑死我怎么看了个 picture， 变得多了一点。
That really happened. You can look at the place where it happened on Google Maps. I used to have the news article.
This is
How many
grace.
days do you think it was before he was able to sleep? That would be some adrenaline.
This is not luck. This is grace.
So, anyway, I just think that's fun. And like I said, I figured we'd kill a little bit of time before everybody got here. So let's go ahead and start with everyone. Now,
他开始走在那边。
is everybody who's here right now, was everybody here last week?
Most.
Not me.
Did you get a chance to, did you watch the video? Okay, so.
Watch a video? No, I just gave him a lesson. Don't blame me. Yeah, short vision.
All right. Then I will do the first couple of slides very quickly, just sort of as a review. So, the solution mode and blame mode, easy to define. Solution mode, people care about the problem, and blame mode, they care about who to blame. And then we've got this table where we have done the first two. But trust me, the rest of it goes much faster because we spent maybe 40 minutes on this one, on the second one. None of the rest take nearly so long. So we should be able to finish today. And so we will skip ahead. I wish I had something that did like page down the whole page, but. All right. So the solution mode is based on the future. It's trying to make the future better, trying to achieve success in the future. Blame mode is all about focusing on the failures that have happened in the past. This is the next thing, which is what it is that we're thinking about doing. What is it that you're trying to get the group to accomplish, right? So in solution mode, what you are trying to bring about is a solution. In blame mode, what you're trying to bring about, I used to say punishment, but that's not exactly right. What you're really trying to bring about is vengeance. Blame mode is about taking revenge on the people who have introduced this problem into our life. And I think it's important, there's an important distinction actually between the punishment and the vengeance. And so we'll talk briefly about that. But basically, solution mode people are trying to make the future good for whoever has the problem. The only piece of future orientation that blame mode have is that they are trying to make the future bad for whoever they think caused the problem. That makes sense? So let's talk a little bit about the difference between justice and vengeance, because this is not an important thing for everyone to understand, but it is an important thing for people in authority to understand. So there are a couple of passages that are the sort of thing that people who like to find contradictions in Scripture would point at. Paul talks about we have to submit to governing authorities because he does not bear the sword in vain. He is the servant of God to execute his wrath on the evildoer. And there's in the news this last couple of weeks, the Pope has decided that the death penalty is always evil. And then a couple of days after that news came out, I was very happy to see, I thought I had a picture. I was very happy to see that he had come to his senses a little bit, because I saw an article in the Babylon Bee that said the Pope clarifies that the death penalty is still acceptable for people who drive slowly in the left-hand lane. Which was obviously a joke. But I don't know exactly what it is that the people who are opposed to the death penalty think that Romans did with swords. I can assure you that they didn't spank people with them. Right? So it is difficult to think of a more extreme punishment than what a Roman would do to you with a sword if he decided he needed to use it. And Paul says he's doing God's job. But most of the Bible is more along these lines. Repay nobody evil for evil. Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Right? There is a difference between punishment and vengeance, and there's a difference between accountability and blame. Because you'll hear people talk about, you get this a lot when you're talking about having a company run well, that there has to be accountability. Right? People have to be accountable, and they have to be held accountable. The primary difference between those two passages is authority. Right? God has appointed the governing authority to be in charge of punishing the people who require punishment. In a family, God has appointed me to decide whether or not my children require punishment. He has not appointed Sally to decide whether or not Kai requires punishment.
Sometimes I do.
Nor has he appointed Kai to decide whether Sally needs punishment. If you do not have authority, then it is simply not your job to go around making sure people get punished. And so, for most of us, what is applying most of the time is vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And the only time that doesn't apply is when we have been given the job by God of punishing, disciplining our children, or if you're the boss in the company and somebody's not pulling their weight and has to be let go, or whatever. Otherwise, not your job. And there's, I think it's in 1 Thessalonians, where Paul says, he tells Christians, mind your own business and work with your hands. If it's not your job to see to it that the right people get punished, then you need to mind your own business and not run around trying to make sure people get punished.
Can mom punish his?
Yes, because you have authority over the children.
Okay.
I was drawing a
Make
distinction
sure.
between me and Sally, not between you and Sally.
Sally's not in it.
The distinction was between fathers and children, not between fathers and
But
children.
if the husband think it's time to punish, but the mom say no, or that
But
other
this is
side.
your husband.
Then
Lord
that
of the
gets us into a
master-
totally different topic, which
Yeah,
I don't want to open.
I try to
That
change you.
Knock down the.
So, if you're in authority, then you may have to hold people accountable. You may have to see to it that they get punished. And the trick is to do that without going into blame mode. And you have to know the difference between accountability and blame, and between justice or punishment and vengeance. And that difference is actually has a lot to do with the next category. So we're going to hold off on this for just a minute, and then we'll come back to it. Okay? The next thing is prevailing emotions. So, if you have a group of people who are in solution mode, then the main emotion that you see is actually largely an absence of emotion, right? So you get a whole lot of, now everybody calm down. right? Let's all calm down. Let's think this through, right? Because emotions in general tend to interfere with analysis, right? So people who are in solution mode, the primary emotion is not much emotion. The primary marker is an absence of a lot of emotion. People in blame mode, obviously I meant to, you know what, I pressed that button before I meant to ask what you guys thought the prevailing emotion would be. Because usually if I ask, people come up with anger very quickly. Right? When you think of people who are in blame mode, it's fairly easy when people try to imagine people in blame mode, they think anger. But there's another emotion that also can be very prominent, and I'm wondering if you guys can think of what that might be. Particularly if you have a group.
Fear.
Fear. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because if you have a room full, in other words, one way to be in blame mode is to be trying to blame other people. The second way to be in blame mode, which sounds logically equivalent but is quite emotionally different, is to be trying to make sure you're not the one that gets blamed. Right? And usually the way we try to make sure that we're not the ones that get blamed is to blame other people. But there's a big difference between trying to blame somebody else because you're mad at them, which is anger driven, and trying to make sure this other person gets blamed because you're afraid if he doesn't get blamed, you will. Right? The practical effect to the person that you're trying to get blamed, it feels the same to him, but it's a very different emotional dynamic that's going on inside you. Right? I don't think that I have to work very hard to convince you that the Bible is not a fan of anger and is not a particular fan of fear. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to convince you of it. But this actually winds up being the difference between accountability and blame, and being the difference between justice and vengeance. And the difference is simply anger. And I think the best way to show you what this means is the best way to show you is for me to yell at Jafar.
Closest.
We're going to imagine the situation. So I said myself, but then it's easier for me to role play the boss. So you've got a basically decent employee who's done something really stupid, and the company lawyers have said, you got to fire the guy because we're going to get sued, and if you haven't fired him, we lose. Right? So accountability means he's got to be let go. And he's going to be let go whether I am in solution mode or whether I'm in blame mode, because the company's problem can only be solved if we let him go. This is me in solution mode. Right? I'm not really going to pick up. But me in solution mode would be like, look, appreciate everything that you have done for us over the years, but you just have to understand we cannot keep you. We have to let you go. I've got a resignation letter here already drawn up. If you want to sign it, then I will let you resign instead of being fired. And we wish you well, but you can't stay here. Right? That is a supervisor who is trying to solve the problem. In blame mode, it looks more like, what do you think you have done? Do you have any idea how much money you have cost this company, right? That
Woke me up.
That's true. There was a Bible study, yeah, where it was like, "Whoa, what happened?" Because the parents were in another room, and all of a sudden I was yelling at one of the kids. Right? That is the difference between accountability.
If it's coming down.
That is the difference between accountability and blame. Right? That's the difference between justice and vengeance. That's the difference between punishment and vengeance. If you take accountability and you add anger, right?
Well, for that point, can we understand in this way that justice, the focus is on God, and the vengeance is like the bad guy to be blamed. So the focus is a little bit different, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And in this case, the supervisor, in the first case, has no interest in causing undue pain to the person he's firing. His focus is entirely on, I need to do what I have to do so that my company doesn't get sued. In the second case, I want to make the person who caused the problem miserable. Right? Okay? Now the next thing is, we will go faster on this because this came up last week when I was answering a question. So we kind of, one thing that Helen told me I needed to do differently this week. If someone asks me a question and I have covered it on a later slide, this week I will say, this will be covered later, rather than leaping forward to the next slide, because apparently there was some confusion. So, solution mode people, when you have a conversation going on that appears to be about a problem, with solution mode people, the conversation is genuinely about the problem. With people in blame mode, it pretends to be a conversation about the problem, but it is really a conversation about the people. And that goes very closely with this next thing. Actually, I forgot, I wanted to explain this. This relational mode against solution mode, we mentioned this last week, so I will do this quickly because it should be just a reminder. If you are focused on a problem rather than on a person, right? Solution mode, blame mode is just one way to be focused on the personal relationship. There's also comfort mode, there's also attack mode. So, if you look at all of the passages where the Pharisees come and ask Jesus questions, there is never a situation, with the exception of Nicodemus, in which the Pharisees actually want to know the answer. Right? The Pharisees are not the slightest bit interested in the answer to the question. What they are doing is they are attacking Jesus and trying to make him look stupid. And what you will find is that Jesus knows perfectly well that they're not interested in the answer to the question. And not only does he not always, he doesn't always even answer the question, right? Which, I meant to look this up and now I forgot to. They asked him, it wasn't whether to pay taxes or not. I can't remember. The Pharisees, you may know this, the Pharisees asked him a question and Jesus said, I'll answer you that question if you'll tell me where John's baptism came from. Was it from God or not? And then the Pharisees got in a huddle and they said, well, this is a trap, which their question was also a trap. He said, this is a trap because if we say it's from God, he's going to say, well, why didn't you believe him? But if we say it wasn't from God, then, well, we can't say that because all the people think he was a prophet. So they wound up saying, we don't know. And Jesus said, well, I'm not answering your question either. Right? Because Jesus knew perfectly well what mode they were in, and that it didn't have anything to do with the actual topic. And so he didn't always answer the question, but he always thwarted the attack. Right? So, comfort mode is the way that we deal with wounds. And comfort mode, what relatively frequently happens is that solution-oriented people come up to somebody whose child has just been diagnosed with cancer, and instead of going into comfort mode, they go into solution mode, which is disastrously wrong. They start giving advice of all things, right? And if we have time at the end, we'll talk some more about that. But the reason that it is so damaging to go into solution mode when someone needs comfort is that they are expecting you to be focused on them, right? And it's even worse because most people who go into solution mode also go analytic. They go non-emotional. So somebody comes to you and they're hurting, and what they are expecting from you is they are expecting for you to be distressed on their behalf and to be totally focused on them, and they get somebody who non-emotionally starts, analyzing a problem and giving them advice, and this does not go well at all. Because when someone needs you to be in relational mode, they do not need you to be in solution mode.
That's most the wife wants.
Yeah, so I think I told the story about the campfire last week, about the young husband saying, I think my wife is crazy.
No,
right?
yeah, right.
And the older husband said, oh, please don't tell her you told us how to solve the problem. Oh, no. And that happens in a lot of young marriages when you have young men who don't understand women very well and young women who don't understand men very well, and you have a conversation like that, and the wife winds up bursting into tears and running out of the room, and the husband's sitting there like, what just happened to me? But yes, it does sometimes happen. It's not always between men and women, because it's not fundamentally about men and women. It's fundamentally about solution mode and comfort mode.
Yeah, sometimes it's between parents and kids.
Sometimes it's between parents and kids. And I have a coworker who, we were talking about this maybe a year ago, and I had described, I think I was just telling the story because I think it's funny, about that camp out. And she said, oh, well, I have that conversation with my daughter all the time, because my coworker, who you will not be surprised to hear, is a software developer, right? And one of the best that I know, and she's brilliantly fast. She was born to solve problems, and the fact that she's a woman doesn't change the fact that God, created her to solve problems. She's a great developer, and she told me she has that conversation over and over with her daughter, where her daughter would come home from school, start talking about problems she was having, and my coworker would start telling her how to solve the problem, and her daughter would get upset, and then my coworker would be all upset. Like, what good is this doing? Let's get this problem solved, right? So it is not fundamentally a husband-wife problem. It is fundamentally a solution comfort mode problem. However, it is statistically far more common for men to be habitually solution mode people and women to be habitually relational mode than the other way around. But if it's the other way around, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with anybody. It just means that the ordinary dynamics get flipped, because it's really this that's driving it. It's really not man and woman that's driving it. It's really this. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to say something?
No, I just hold the question up to them.
They told me they have two daughters. One is relational mode, one is solution mode.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny to see their conversation sometimes.
Yeah, conversations between one who's in solution and one who's comfort.
Yeah.
It can be funny to watch until someone gets mad, then they're not funny.
Yeah.
You were saying?
Yeah, I'm saying, sometimes it looks like kids need a solution, they went to daddy.
Yes, that's right. I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, let me chip in for a moment. Yeah, I was thinking of like when to use the comfort mode and when to use the solution mode, or maybe one after another, because it seems like for a relatively minor wound or a problem, you can use comfort first. But for something urgent or serious, comfort mode cannot be used, by itself,
I think the word you used, I think you used the word urgent, and I think that's the key.
Right.
If there's a solution that has to be solved now, or somebody's going to die, that kind of thing, really bad consequences are going to follow, then you kind of have to get it solved and worry about sorting out the emotions later. And you know what? There's like 5 slides at the end talking about comfort mode and solution mode, so we'll come back to it. I am an admirably obedient husband at times. At times. The trickiest problems are the ones where we have a problem in our relationship. Right? Those are the ones that are difficult, because the problem in the relationship has to get solved, but because you're talking about a relationship, you keep getting dragged back over to the person, which tends to drag you back into blame. So if you go through like premarital counseling and you get all of the rules about how to argue and how to resolve disagreements and all of this stuff, if you go back and you reread the books that they gave you when you got married, what you can see is that these books consist almost entirely, the books about dealing with conflict, consist almost entirely of specific tactics to keep you in solution mode while you talk about your relationship. And I think I mentioned this last week. The real gender difference is not solution mode and comfort mode. The gender difference that is much more consistent is the difficulty men have with multitasking compared to women. Because most guys, we have to concentrate to make sure we don't hurt people's feelings. And in fact, very, very often, 2 guys talking about a problem just don't worry about hurting each other's feelings. Right? They just talk about it and solve the problem, and it can mystify women watching 2 guys who are trying to work a problem out, and one of them comes up with an idea, and the other says, "Oh, that's stupid. You're being an idiot," and they just keep going, and then when it's over, they're just happy, and they're fine with each other, and nobody's feelings got hurt because they weren't even thinking about feelings. They were both focused on the problem, right? It is, I think, more of a challenge for most men to deal with relational solution mode because you almost have to concentrate on 2 things at once. Because you have to concentrate on the problem, but you still can't say something that hurts her feelings. Right? And most guys can either concentrate on solving a problem, or they can concentrate on not hurting someone's feelings, but they have trouble concentrating on both at once. So that's just a skill that most men have to develop in marriage. And I'll tell you the truth, the biggest thing for me is if Helen and I have a disagreement that we need to work out, I talk a lot more slowly because I'm thinking a lot more about what I say before I say it.